What truly unfolds when a pillar of British cinema, an actor revered for his chameleon-like transformations and quiet intensity, agrees to a seemingly benign daytime television interview, only to find himself in the crosshairs of a host determined to provoke rather than promote. In a span of time so brief it would later seem impossible, a single comment, so venomous and utterly unprofessional, would detonate on live television, leading to one of the most talked about, shocking walkouts the medium has ever witnessed. Gary Oldman had entered the vibrant, almost aggressively cheerful studios of Loose Women that morning with the standard expectations of a seasoned professional on a promotional tour. The agenda was simple: discuss his latest film, The Lamplighter's Son, perhaps offer a charming anecdote or two from the set, and connect with the show's massive viewership. What he encountered, however, was an ambush disguised as a chat. The hostility began to curdle the air almost as soon as he settled into the plush, deep purple sofa. The studio lights were hot. The live audience was buzzing with anticipation, and the panel was arranged and ready for broadcast. Coleen Nolan occupied the central seat of power, a practiced, matriarchal figure, flanked by the composed professionalism of Ruth Langsford, the famously acerbic Janet Street Porter, and the steady, thoughtful presence of Kay Adams. Gary, dressed in a sharp, understated grey suit, her beard relaxed, a faint, friendly smile playing on his lips, he was prepared to engage, to perform the familiar dance of the publicity circuit with his characteristic wit and intelligence. "So, Gary," Coleen began, her body language a study in practiced television warmth as she leaned forward, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "It is absolutely lovely to have you with us, truly." Gary inclined his head graciously. "Now, before we get into the new film, which I'm dying to hear about, I have to bring something up. It's been playing on my mind, to be honest." Gary's smile held, but an eyebrow arched in gentle curiosity. He adjusted his cufflink. "Oh, and what might that be, Coleen?" "Well," she said, her tone shifting just slightly, taking on a conspiratorial, "we're all friends here edge. It's just that you've been rather vocal lately, haven't you? About the film industry. A lot of chatter about how awful Hollywood is, how it's all gone wrong, how actors are treated so badly." She paused, letting the accusation hang in the air. "But Gary, let's be honest, shall we? You've earned millions upon millions from that very same industry. Doesn't all that criticism start to sound a bit hypocritical?" A subtle shift rippled through the other panelists. On the end, Ruth Langsford's eyes darted down to her prepared questions, a slight frown creasing her brow. This was clearly not on the approved list. Janet Street Porter, never one to be easily surprised, nonetheless betrayed a flicker of genuine astonishment, her head tilting as she sized up the situation. Kay Adams' professional smile tightened, her gaze fixed on Oldman, her expression unreadable. Gary's own smile didn't vanish, but it lost its easy warmth, becoming more of a mask of professional courtesy. He remained composed, his posture unchanged. "Hypocritical is a strong word, Coleen. I wouldn't frame it that way," he replied, his voice calm and measured. "I think it's entirely possible, and frankly necessary, to be immensely grateful for the opportunities one has been given, while simultaneously being able to critique the very real and systemic problems within the institution that provided them. The two aren't mutually exclusive." But Coleen was already shaking her head, leaning in further as if sharing a secret with the audience. "I don't know, Gary," she pressed, her voice adopting a patronizing, slightly chiding tone. "You're sitting there in that lovely, expensive suit. You probably arrived in a car that costs more than most people's homes. And you're talking about how hard done by actors are. Can you not see how that comes across to the ordinary, working people watching at home?" Gary shifted in his seat, a barely perceptible adjustment. The low hum of the audience had faded into a tense silence. The air in the studio felt thick. "I believe you might be misinterpreting the nature of my comments, Coleen," he said, still holding her gaze. "When I speak of the problems plaguing the industry, my primary concern isn't financial compensation, certainly not for those at my level. I'm referring to a decline in creative integrity, about the corporatization of storytelling, the stifling of original voices, and the profound responsibility we have as artists and storytellers to reflect the human condition, not just to sell tickets." "Oh, please," Coleen interrupted with a sudden, sharp wave of her hand, a gesture of complete dismissal. The audience let out a collective, nervous titter. Creative integrity? "Gary, love, you were in the Batman films. Don't sit there and tell me that was all about profound creative integrity." The other panelists looked mortified. This was no longer a gentle ribbing. It was a direct assault. Ruth tried to steer the conversation back to safer waters. "Perhaps we should move on to Gary's new film, The Lamplighter's Son. I hear it's getting fantastic early reviews." Coleen, however, was relentless. No, Ruth, hang on. I think this is important," she insisted, turning her full attention back to their guest. "Gary, you've built a significant part of your career on huge, big-budget blockbusters. making an absolute fortune in the process, and now you want to stand on a soapbox and lecture the rest of us about art. It just seems a little rich, doesn't it? Gary's jaw tightened visibly, a muscle feathered along his cheekbone. Coleen, with all due respect, you're making a series of incredibly unfair and broad assumptions about both my career and my personal motivations. The Batman films, for the record, were extraordinary pieces of cinematic art, directed by one of the greatest filmmakers of our time. I was immensely proud to be a part of them. But my participation in a successful and critically acclaimed franchise does not preclude me from caring deeply about other aspects of filmmaking, or from wishing the industry as a whole would aspire to more. But Gary, Coleen continued, her voice becoming more aggressive, more prosecutorial, you've been in Hollywood for decades. You've been a key player in the system, as you call it. You've benefited from it enormously, more than almost anyone. And now you want to turn around and bite the hand that fed you all that caviar? Janet Street Porter could no longer remain a silent observer. Her distinct, clipped voice cut through the tension. Coleen, I really think Gary is just trying to— No, Janet, Coleen snapped, not even glancing at her colleague. I want to hear Gary explain this. Because frankly, Gary, it sounds to me like you're having your cake and eating it too. You want all the perks, the fame, the money of being a Hollywood A-lister, but you also want the credibility of being some sort of serious, high-minded artist who's above it all. Gary's hands, which had been resting loosely on his knees, now clenched slightly on the arms of his chair. The studio lights seemed to catch the faint sheen of sweat on his brow. That is not what I'm saying at all, Coleen, and I think you know that, he said, his voice low but firm. I have never ever claimed to be above anything. I've worked my entire life in this craft. I've simply suggested that as an industry, we can do better. That we can tell more challenging, more meaningful stories. That we can treat the people who make these films, from the writers to the caterers, with a greater degree of respect. More respect. Coleen's voice rose in pitch, a note of theatrical disbelief coloring her words. Gary, you've worked with the biggest directors on the planet. You've won BAFTAs, Golden Globes. You've been nominated for Academy Awards. What more respect could you possibly want? It is not about me, personally, Gary replied, the strain now evident in his voice, though he fought to keep it controlled. It's about the ecosystem of the entire industry. It's about the young actors just starting out who are exploited. It's about the brilliant writers whose scripts are butchered by a dozen different executives. It's about the crew members who work 17-hour days for months on end, for pay that barely covers their rent, and whose health suffers for it. Coleen let out a short, harsh laugh. It was a jarring sound that echoed unnaturally in the soundproofed studio. Oh, here we go! So now you're the champion of the working class, are you? That's rich. That is truly rich, coming from a man who probably spends more on a single bottle of wine than most people in our audience earn in a week. The audience was dead silent now. A thick, uncomfortable pall had descended over the set. Ruth, Janet, and Kay exchanged horrified glances. This was supposed to be light, aspirational daytime entertainment, not a public crucifixion. This had gone far beyond the pale. Gary took a slow, deliberate breath, his chest rising and falling. Coleen, I hardly think my personal finances are relevant to this discussion, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. I came here today in good faith to talk about my film, a project I am deeply passionate about. I did not come here to be subjected to a personal attack. Attacked. Coleen's eyes widened in a display of mock astonishment. Gary, I'm just asking you a few honest questions. I'm being a journalist. If you can't handle a tiny bit of scrutiny, maybe you shouldn't be giving interviews where you criticize the very industry that has made you wealthy beyond the wildest dreams of most normal people. That is not fair, Gary said, his voice barely a whisper but laced with steel. That is not what I have been doing, and you are deliberately mischaracterizing my position. But Coleen was just warming up. She smelled blood in the water, and the worst, the truly unforgivable blow was yet to come. You know what, Gary? She said, leaning back in her chair and crossing her arms, a smug, triumphant expression spreading across her face. I think I know what the real problem is here. I think you've forgotten where you came from. You've been living inside your gilded Hollywood bubble for so long, you've completely lost touch with reality. Gary's eyes flashed with a sudden cold fire. I beg your pardon. Well, it's the truth, isn't it? Coleen pressed on, clearly enjoying the power she wielded, the discomfort she was causing. When was the last time you took the bus, Gary, eh? When was the last time you had to worry about your electricity bill? You sit there pontificating about the struggles of ordinary people in the film business, but you haven't been an ordinary person for the better part of 4 decades. Ruth Langsford looked frantically towards the producers standing in the shadows off camera, her eyes pleading for an intervention, a commercial break, anything to end the carnage. Coleen, maybe we should just— No, Ruth, let me finish, Coleen snapped, her focus laser-sharp on Gary. Gary, I've done my research. You live in a multi-million-dollar mansion in Los Angeles. You have a collection of cars. You probably have a whole team of staff, a cook, a cleaner, a driver. And you want us, the public, to believe that you understand the struggles of working-class people. It's insulting. Gary's voice was now dangerously quiet, each word carefully enunciated. Coleen, my background is working class. I grew up in a council flat in New Cross, South London. My father, a welder, left our family when I was 7 years old. My mother raised me and my 2 sisters on her own, working multiple jobs just to put food on our table. I know exactly what struggle looks like. It is etched into my memory. But that was 50 years ago, Gary. Coleen shot back instantly, her voice dripping with condescension. Ancient history. What have you done lately? What have you actually tangibly done to help these people you claim to care so much about? That's not something I feel the need to broadcast to the world, Gary replied, his composure finally beginning to visibly crack. But since you are demanding an answer on national television, I have quietly and consistently supported numerous charities that help underprivileged youth get into the arts. I have mentored dozens of young actors over the years, giving them my time and advice for free. I have used my position when I can to try and champion positive changes and better working conditions within the industry. Coleen rolled her eyes with theatrical flair. Oh, quietly supported. How very convenient. No publicity, no proof. We just have to take your word for it that you're this great secret philanthropist. Janet Street Porter could not hold her tongue a moment longer. Coleen, this is getting far too personal, don't you think? It's inappropriate, personal? Coleen turned to Janet with a look of wide-eyed mock innocence. I'm just asking the questions our viewers at home are screaming at the telly. Gary puts himself on this pedestal as a champion of the downtrodden. I'm just asking to see a receipt. Kay Adams, who had been silent for most of the exchange, finally spoke up, her voice calm but firm. I believe Gary has been perfectly clear about his position. Perhaps we could talk about the lamplighter's son now. I understand you play a very complex character, but Coleen was on a roll, deaf to her colleagues' attempts to de-escalate. You know what really gets me, Gary, she said, turning back to him as if they were the only 2 people in the room. You talk about creative integrity, but you've made sequels. You've done franchises. You've taken the easy money, the big studio paycheck, just like everyone else you seem to criticize. Gary's hands were now visibly trembling, a fine tremor of pure adrenaline and rage. There is nothing inherently wrong with sequels or franchises, Coleen. Some of the greatest stories ever told have been part of larger, epic narratives. The Dark Knight trilogy, for example, which you so casually dismissed, dealt with incredibly complex post-9/11 themes about justice, societal decay, corruption, and moral ambiguity. It was hardly simple fare. Oh, please, Coleen scoffed, letting out another derisive laugh. They're comic book movies, Gary. Let's not get carried away and pretend they're Citizen Kane. And what is wrong with comic book movies? Gary's voice was rising now, losing its carefully controlled modulation. Why can't popular entertainment also be art? Why is it that stories that resonate with millions of people, that bring them joy and make them think, are somehow less valid in your eyes? Why can't they possess depth and meaning? Because they're made for 12-year-old boys, Gary, Coleen said with a condescending smirk. They're about men in silly costumes, punching each other through walls. It's not exactly Shakespeare, is it? The other panelists looked absolutely horrified. Ruth was now shaking her head slowly, her mouth slightly agape. Janet was staring at Coleen with an expression of pure, unadulterated disbelief. Kay looked as though she wished the floor would open up and swallow her whole. Gary leaned forward in his chair, his body tense. I'm sorry, but I find that attitude to be incredibly insulting. Not just to me, but to the brilliant artists who create those films, and to the millions of intelligent people of all ages who find meaning and inspiration in those stories. Who are you, Coleen, to be the sole arbiter of what constitutes legitimate art? I'm someone who's been working in television for over 20 years, Coleen replied sharply, her own temper flaring. I know what real, honest entertainment looks like, and it doesn't involve grown men running around in capes and cowls. Real entertainment? Gary's voice was incredulous, laced with a bitter irony. Coleen, with all due respect, this is a daytime talk show where, on most days, you and your colleagues spend an hour discussing celebrity gossip, diet tips, and relationship squabbles. I hardly think that gives you the authority to stand on a high horse and lecture anyone, let alone me, about artistic merit. A collective gasp went through the studio audience. It was a direct hit and it landed hard. Coleen's face flushed a deep, blotchy red. How dare you? How dare I what? Gary shot back, his voice now ringing with righteous anger. Point out the obvious. You have spent the last 10 minutes relentlessly attacking my career, my character, and my motivations based on nothing more than your own ill-informed assumptions and prejudices. You have dismissed entire genres of storytelling as worthless. You have questioned my integrity and my authenticity. And when I finally defend myself, you have the audacity to act offended. Ruth tried desperately one last time to regain control of her imploding show. All right, let's all just take a breath for a moment. Let's just calm down. No, Ruth, Gary said, his voice suddenly louder, echoing in the tense studio. I'm tired of taking breaths. I'm done being calm. I came here to have a civilized, respectful conversation about my work, and instead, I've been subjected to a malicious character assassination by someone who clearly made up her mind about me before I even walked through the studio door. Coleen refused to back down, doubling down on her aggression. I decided nothing, Gary. I just asked you some hard questions. Questions you clearly can't handle because you're so used to everyone in Hollywood kissing your backside. Hard questions? Gary was almost shouting now, his face a mask of fury. These are not hard questions, Coleen. These are attacks disguised as questions. There is a profound difference between journalism and harassment, and you crossed that line 10 minutes ago. Harassment? Coleen's voice rose to a shrill pitch, matching his volume. Oh, get over yourself, Gary. You're on a talk show. This is what we do. We ask questions. If you can't handle the heat, maybe you should get out of the kitchen. You are absolutely right, Gary said, his voice suddenly dropping to a cold, calm, and utterly chilling register. Maybe I shouldn't be here. He looked from Coleen to the other panelists, a deep and profound disappointment in his eyes. Because this isn't a talk show, Coleen. This is an ambush. And I do not have to sit here and take it. Janet tried one final futile attempt to save the situation. Gary, please, let's just... But it was too late. The damage was irreparable. Gary was already reaching behind him, his fingers fumbling for the clasp of his microphone pack. The tension in the studio was a physical thing, a palpable pressure that made it hard to breathe. Everyone knew something catastrophic was about to happen, and then Coleen Nolan opened her mouth one last time and uttered the words that would echo across the landscape of daytime television for years to come. You know what your problem is, Gary, she sneered, her voice dripping with a venom that shocked even her own co-hosts. You think because you've got an Oscar nomination and a fancy accent you're better than the rest of us. But at the end of the day, you're just another washed-up actor, a desperate for a bit of relevance, lecturing normal people from your ivory tower about problems you haven't had to face in 30 years. The studio fell into a vacuum of absolute silence. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. The camera operator closest to the panel visibly flinched and stopped moving. Ruth Langsford's mouth fell open in a perfect silent O of horror. Janet Street Porter looked physically ill, as if she'd been punched in the gut. Kay Adams brought her hands up to cover her face, unable to watch. Gary, who had been half turned away, slowly rotated back to face Coleen directly. His face was ashen. His voice, when he finally spoke, was barely a whisper, yet it seemed to cut through the silence like a surgeon's scalpel, carrying across the entire studio with terrifying clarity. What did you just say to me? Coleen, perhaps emboldened by his quietness, mistaking controlled rage for weakness, pressed her advantage. You heard me, Gary, washed up, desperate for relevance. Is that why you're really here? Because the career isn't quite what it used to be, and you need to keep your name in the headlines, somehow? Gary's face went completely white. He rose slowly from the sofa, his microphone pack still clutched in his hand. For a moment, it looked as if he might throw it. Instead, he simply held it. In 35 years of doing interviews, he said, his voice shaking with a rage so profound it was almost silent. All around the world, I have never, ever been spoken to with such a complete and utter lack of respect. He paused, his gaze boring into her. What you just did, that is not journalism. It is not entertainment. It is cruelty. Pure, simple, and utterly unforgivable. Oh, come on, Gary, Coleen said, though a flicker of uncertainty, of fear, had finally entered her eyes. Don't be so dramatic. Dramatic? Gary's voice rose again, shaking with disbelief. Dramatic? Coleen, you just called me a washed-up, desperate actor on national television. You questioned my relevance, my entire life's work, my character and my motivations, based on nothing but your own petty, vindictive prejudices. And now you have the gall to dismiss my entirely reasonable reaction as being dramatic. Ruth finally found her voice, a desperate, pleading squeak. Gary, please, let's just... No, Ruth. Gary cut her off, though his tone when he addressed her was gentle, full of regret. I'm sorry, but no. I will not sit here and legitimize this by pretending it is in any way acceptable. This is not how you treat your guests. This is not how you treat fellow professionals. This is not how you treat human beings. He turned his burning gaze back to Coleen, who now looked distinctly uncomfortable, the smug mask having finally crumbled, to reveal a woman who had just realized she had gone too far. You want to talk about relevance, Coleen? Let me tell you about relevance. I have had the profound privilege of working with masters of the craft. With Christopher Nolan, with David Fincher, with Francis Ford Coppola. I've brought characters to life that have resonated with audiences across the globe, from George Smiley to Winston Churchill. I've spent decades honing my craft, pushing myself to grow, to learn, to be a better artist and a better man. His voice grew stronger with every word, more controlled, but no less intense. The actor in him was taking over, not to perform, but to project truth. You want to know about giving back? I have mentored countless young actors who were lost and struggling. I have supported charities that help working-class kids like I was, get a foothold in an industry that is designed to keep them out. I have used whatever platform I have to speak up for people who do not have a voice. But I do not need to justify any of that to you. Coleen tried to interrupt, to defend herself. Gary, I think you're overreacting. It was just overreacting. Gary's eyes flashed with a fury that made her physically recoil. Coleen, you have spent the last 15 minutes attempting to dismantle me, to tear me down piece by piece, for no discernible reason other than your own amusement. You have dismissed my work, you have questioned my integrity, and you have profoundly insulted my intelligence. And when I stand up for myself, you call it overreacting. He began to deliberately unhook the microphone cable from the battery pack. The metallic click was deafening in the silent studio. You know what? You are right about one thing. I'm better than this. Not because I have awards or money or fame, but because I believe in treating people with a basic, fundamental human decency. Because I do not attack people for sport. Because I understand the difference between asking tough, insightful questions and being needlessly, wantonly cruel. Janet Street Porter made one last, desperate attempt to salvage the wreckage. Gary, we're all colleagues here. We're all in the same business after all. Gary looked at her, and the anger in his eyes was replaced for a moment with genuine sadness. Janet, with the greatest of respect, we are not in the same business. I'm in the business of storytelling, of creating art, of trying to move people and make them think and feel. This, he gestured around the garish purple studio, at the cameras, at the stunned faces. This is something else entirely. He stood to his full height now, the disconnected microphone pack dangling from his hand. He looked at Coleen, not with anger anymore, but with a kind of weary pity. Coleen, I genuinely feel sorry for you. I don't know what has happened in your life to make you believe that it's acceptable to treat people this way, but I promise you, it is not. It's not professional. It's not entertaining. And it's not right. Coleen's face was bright red, a mixture of fury and humiliation. You can't just walk out, Gary. We're live on television. Gary paused at the edge of the raised sofa platform and turned back to face her one last time, his expression unreadable. That's precisely why I can walk out, Coleen. Because we are live on television. Because there are millions of people watching who deserve better than this grotesque spectacle. Because there are young people out there, young actors, writers, directors, who might be watching and thinking about a career in entertainment. And they need to see that this kind of toxic behavior has consequences. They need to see that you can and should walk away. He then turned his gaze from her and looked directly into the lens of the main camera, speaking not to the panel, but to the viewers at home. To anyone watching right now, I want you to know that this is not normal. This is not how professional people are supposed to conduct themselves. You deserve to be treated with respect. Whether you're a guest on a television show or just going about your daily life, don't ever let anyone convince you that cruelty is a valid form of entertainment. He turned back to the panel, his eyes skipping over Coleen. Ruth Janet Kay, I am genuinely sorry that you had to be a part of this. You deserve better colleagues and a far better working environment. And then, without another word, without a single backward glance, he dropped the microphone pack onto the seat he had just vacated and walked off the set. The cameras, after a moment of stunned hesitation, followed him as he strode past the shocked crew members, past the frantic producers gesturing wildly from the wings, and straight out of the studio door. His determined footsteps echoed in the sudden cavernous silence. For a long, agonizing moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The four remaining panelists sat frozen in a tableau of shock and disbelief, the empty space on the purple sofa a gaping wound in the center of the frame. The audience was utterly silent, unsure whether to applaud or to whisper amongst themselves. Even the seasoned television crew seemed paralyzed. Finally, a panicked voice crackling in Ruth Langsford's earpiece spurred her into action. She blinked, as if waking from a trance, and turned to the camera with a deer-in-the-headlights expression. Well, We'll be right back after this break, she stammered, her voice weak and unsteady. The screen abruptly cut to a commercial for laundry detergent. But the damage was done. In a handful of minutes, Coleen Nolan had not only destroyed an interview, but had also torched her own reputation in a spectacular bonfire of ego and malice. She had shown the world the ugly face of entertainment when entitlement and cruelty are allowed to run rampant. And Gary Oldman, with his dignity fiercely intact and his principles uncompromised, had simply walked away from the flames, leaving behind one of the most astonishing and unforgettable moments in the history of daytime television. The harsh, synthetic cheerfulness of the laundry detergent jingle filled the void, a bizarre soundtrack to the carnage that had just unfolded. On the set of Loose Women, the world had not stopped. It had simply frozen in a state of collective shock. The moment the broadcast cut away, a cacophony erupted. The floor manager, a man named David with a perpetually stressed expression, sprinted towards the panel, his headset askew. "What the hell was that?" he hissed, his voice a strained whisper that was somehow louder than a shout. He was looking at Coleen, but his question was for the universe. In the earpieces of all four women, the voice of the executive producer, a woman named Sarah, was practically incandescent with rage. "Coleen, do not say another word. Not one. Do you understand me? Ruth, you're taking us to the next segment. Read the prompter and only the prompter." Janet K., just nod. "Don't look at her." Coleen Nolan sat ramrod straight, her face a mottled mask of crimson and white. The smugness had evaporated, replaced by a defensive, brittle anger. "Well, what was I supposed to do?" she snapped at the floor manager. "Just let him sit there being all high and mighty? He was insulting our viewers." Janet Street Porter, who had been staring into the middle distance as if trying to mentally erase the last 15 minutes, finally turned her head. Her expression was glacial. "He was not insulting the viewers, Coleen. He was defending his life's work from your boorish, ill-informed and frankly pathetic attack. That was a career-defining moment of self-immolation. I hope you enjoyed it. Now, hang on a minute," Coleen began, but Ruth Langsford, ever the professional, even in the midst of a Category 5 disaster. "Cut her off." "Not now, Coleen," Ruth said, her voice trembling but firm. She was looking at David, the floor manager. "What's on the prompter? How are we getting out of this?" 60 seconds back on air, David said, running a hand through his hair. "Sarah wants you to offer a brief apology for the tone of the interview, then throw to the pre-recorded segment with Gok 1. When we come back live, we're going straight to the phone-in. Coleen, you are to look sorry and say nothing." "Look sorry? He's the one who walked out." Coleen protested, her voice rising. "Coleen, for the love of God, shut up," Kay Adams said, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of profound disappointment. It was the quiet condemnation that seemed to finally break through Coleen's defenses. Her mouth snapped shut, and a look of dawning horror began to creep into her eyes. She glanced at the giant monitors around the studio, which were still showing the laundry commercial, and seemed to realize, for the first time, that this wasn't just a backstage argument. This had happened, live, 10 seconds. David called out, retreating from the set as camera operators scurried back into position. The four women straightened up. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken fury and panic. Ruth took a deep breath, her face a perfect mask of television composure, though her knuckles were white where she gripped her notes. Janet stared ahead, her expression one of utter contempt. Kay looked down at her lap, unable to fake a smile. And Coleen. Coleen looked like she had just been told her house was on fire. The jingle ended. The red light on camera 2 blinked on. "Welcome back to Loose Women," Ruth Langford said, her smile so forced it looked painful. "We'd like to apologize to any of our viewers who were offended by the last segment. Tensions were clearly running high, and it was an uncomfortable moment for everyone involved." She glanced briefly at the empty space on the sofa. "We, of course, wish Gary all the best with his new film. Now, earlier this week, we sent Gok 1 to find out how you can update your autumn wardrobe for under £50. As the pre-recorded fashion segment began to play, filling the studio with upbeat music and Gok's infectious enthusiasm, the silence on the panel returned, heavier than before. Coleen finally seemed to grasp the enormity of what had occurred. She could feel the vibrations from her phone, which was on silent in her handbag, under the desk. It was buzzing incessantly, a frantic, angry hornet trapped in the dark. She wasn't wrong. Out in the real world, the digital equivalent of a nuclear bomb had detonated. The clip of Gary Oldman's walkout, filmed on a dozen cell phones pointed at television screens, was already on Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok. The hashtag #IStandWithGary was the #1 trend worldwide within 3 minutes. Coleen Nolan and Loose Women disaster were not far behind. The comment sections were a brutal, unending torrent of fury, an absolute masterclass in dignity from Gary Oldman in the face of such vile, unprofessional bullying. ITV needs to issue a public apology and fire Coleen Nolan immediately. Disgraceful. The moment she called a BAFTA-winning, Oscar-nominated actor washed up was the moment her own career ended. He came to talk about art, and she picked a fight like a pub landlady. Embarrassing for the entire country. Back in the studio, the show limped towards its conclusion. The phone-in segment was a minefield. The producers were screening calls frantically, but the topic was supposed to be about annoying habits of your partner. The first caller, a woman named Sandra from Birmingham, got through the net. My husband's annoying habit is that he... Well, actually, can I just say that Coleen Nolan was an absolute disgrace today, and Gary Oldman is a legend. She was cut off abruptly. When the final credits rolled and the theme music swelled, no one moved. The polite applause from the audience died away quickly, replaced by an awkward, shuffling silence as they were ushered out. The executive producer, Sarah, was on the set before the lights had even cooled. She was a small, formidable woman, and she was vibrating with a cold, controlled fury. My office. All of you? Now, she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. The walk from the studio to the production offices was a walk of shame. Crew members who were usually chatty and familiar busied themselves coiling cables and avoided making eye contact. In the green room, Coleen's personal publicist was waiting, his face pale. "Turn your phone off, Coleen," was all he said. In Sarah's office, the 4 panelists sat on a sofa, a grim echo of the one they had just left. Sarah paced in front of them, her phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, I understand. No, I can't give you a statement yet. I'm fully aware of the gravity of the situation, Mark. I will call you back." She hung up and threw the phone onto her desk. "That was the head of ITV Daytime," she said, her voice dangerously calm. He was, shall we say, displeased. Gary Oldman's publicist has already issued a statement about an unacceptably hostile and unprofessional environment. Our main sponsor for the week, a major supermarket chain, is threatening to pull their advertising. The clip has been viewed, as of 30 seconds ago, an estimated 7 million times. This is not a gaffe, Coleen. This is a cataclysm, Coleen finally broke. "I don't understand. It was just a debate." He was being so pretentious about his art. "He is Gary Oldman," Sarah exploded, her control finally shattering. "He's one of the most respected actors of his generation. He is on our show to promote his film, to sell our advertising space, to make our viewers happy. He is not here to be your personal punching bag because you decided you didn't like the cut of his jib. You didn't just insult a guest, you insulted our audience's intelligence. You came across as a bitter, jealous bully, and you have dragged this entire show down with you." She turned to the other 3. "Ruth, Kay, Janet, you will be expected to handle tomorrow's show. We will have a statement." "Coleen," she said, her voice turning to ice, "you're suspended, effective immediately. Go home. Do not talk to the press. Do not post on social media. Do not do anything until you hear from me or the legal department. Is that clear?" Coleen Nolan looked up, her face streaked with tears, a picture of utter bewilderment and despair. She had walked into the studio that morning, a household name, a beloved television personality. She would leave as a pariah, the villain in a story that was now being told and retold in every corner of the internet. Her name forever linked to the quiet, dignified footsteps of the man who simply stood up and walked away. The purple sofa in the studio sat empty under the cooling lights, a silent monument to the moment daytime television ate itself alive. The morning after the implosion, the British media landscape was a singular roaring inferno, and at its heart was a 15-minute clip from a daytime television show. The front pages of the newspapers, usually reserved for politics or royal gossip, were unanimous. Oldman's dignified exit, declared the Times, featuring a still of Gary walking away from the purple sofa. "Daytime TV disgrace," screamed The Sun, with a large, unflattering photo of Coleen Nolan's enraged face. Online, it was even more intense. Think pieces were being published by the hour, dissecting the confrontation as a microcosm of class warfare. Celebrity entitlement, the decline of civil discourse, and the nature of art versus entertainment. Gary Oldman was being hailed as a folk hero, a paragon of quiet integrity. Coleen Nolan was the subject of a digital witch hunt so ferocious it was terrifying in its unanimity. At the ITV studios on the South Bank, the atmosphere was funereal. The usual pre-show buzz of gossip and laughter in the hair and makeup department was replaced by hushed whispers and averted gazes. Ruth Langsford, Janet Street Porter, and Kay Adams sat in their respective chairs, the silence between them heavy and oppressive. The 4th makeup station, Coleen's, was conspicuously empty. A last-minute call had been made to Brenda Edwards, a beloved singer and regular panelist known for her warm, non-confrontational style. She had agreed to come in, and now sat slightly apart from the others, looking as though she'd been invited to a wake. In the production briefing room, the executive producer, Sarah, addressed her fractured team. Her face was pale, and she looked as though she hadn't slept. "Right," she began, her voice clipped and devoid of any warmth. "Let's be clear. Today is about damage control. Nothing more. Ruth, you will read the statement at the top of the show. It has been approved by the network, by legal, and by compliance. You will read it exactly as it is on the teleprompter. You will not ad-lib. You will not offer any personal opinions. You will then immediately move on to the first topic." Janet Street Porter let out a short, cynical huff. "And what is the topic? Is it ever okay to call a national treasure washed up on live television?" "The topic," Sarah said, glaring at Janet, "is petty things that drive you crazy at the supermarket. After that, we have a segment on autumn soups. We are aiming for the blandest, most inoffensive show in the history of television. Brenda," she said, turning to the new arrival, "thank you for being here. Your job is to be lovely and talk about butternut squash. Do not, under any circumstances, mention yesterday's events or Coleen." Brenda nodded, her warm smile looking strained. "Understood. Our goal today is to survive," Sarah concluded. "Just get to the end credits without another catastrophe. Is that understood?" 3 heads nodded in unison. The unspoken reality hung in the air. The show itself, a jewel in ITV's daytime crown for over 2 decades, was now on life support, miles away in the serene, climate-controlled quiet of a suite at the Corinthia Hotel. Gary Oldman was pouring a cup of English breakfast tea. His phone lay on the table, buzzing intermittently. His agent from Los Angeles, a fast-talking man named Leo, was on speakerphone, and the tracking numbers for the film's opening weekend just shot up 12% overnight, Gary. 12! The studio is ecstatic. The clip is everywhere in the States. CNN ran it. Fox News ran it, for God's sake. They're calling you the class act. You're a hero, a meme, a legend. It's the best damn publicity we never paid for." Well, Gary sighed, stirring his tea. He looked out the window at the grey London sky. "That's not why I did it, Leo." I know, Leo said quickly. "Of course not. You did it for integrity, for decency, all that good stuff. And it just so happens that integrity is polling through the roof right now. Look, I'm just saying, the studio wants to know if you'll do a sit-down with a major US network. A proper interview. 60 minutes. They want to talk about Hollywood hypocrisy and the state of media. You could own this narrative." "No," Gary said, his voice firm but weary. "Absolutely not. I've said what I needed to say. I'm not going to build a promotional tour on the back of that woman's career immolating." It feels ghoulish. He had felt a righteous anger yesterday, a cold fury. Today, that had been replaced by a profound sadness. He thought of Coleen Nolan, not as the aggressive prosecutor on the panel, but as a person who was now facing a global firestorm of hatred. "Just put out a simple statement, Leo. Say that I consider the matter closed and I'm focused on the film, and that I wish her no ill will personally." "No ill will? Gary, she called you a washed-up has-been." "And look what happened," Gary replied quietly. "Isn't that enough?" In a darkened living room, in a gated community in Surrey, Coleen Nolan was doing the one thing her publicist had begged her not to do. She was reading the comments. Her face, illuminated by the cold blue light of her phone, was puffy and tear-streaked. The television was on, muted, showing a breakfast show host discussing the viral clip with a stony-faced media analyst. Outside her gates, she could see the long lenses of the paparazzi, a pack of hyenas waiting for a sign of life. Her phone rang, and she flinched. It was her agent. She answered, her voice a croak. "Hey, Coleen?" Her agent's voice was grim. "I've just spoken with Sarah and the head of legal at ITV. They're officially invoking the morality and disrepute clause in your contract." "What? What does that mean?" she whispered, though she already knew. "It means they're not just suspending you. They're building a case for termination, for cause. They're saying your actions brought the network and the show into public contempt and ridicule. Coleen, they want you gone, and they don't want to pay out the rest of your contract." A fresh wave of nausea and panic washed over her. But it was a debate. "We always do that. We argue." "You didn't argue, Coleen," her agent said, his voice losing its professional veneer and becoming brutally honest. "You executed him, and in doing so, you executed yourself. You need to stop looking at the internet, call a lawyer, and prepare for the fact that your television career, as you know it, might be over." Coleen dropped the phone, a choked sob escaping her lips. She looked up at the muted television screen just as they played the final devastating clip. Gary Oldman, looking directly into the camera, his voice calm and clear, talking about decency and respect. He looked like a statesman, and she, in the reaction shots, looked like a monster. Back in Studio 2, the familiar Loose Women theme music faded. The red light came on. Ruth Langsford looked into the camera, her expression a carefully calibrated mix of sincerity and solemnity. Before we begin today's show, she began, her voice steady, we want to address the events that took place on yesterday's program. An interview with our guest, Gary Oldman, descended into a conversation that was unacceptably personal and confrontational. For our part in that, and for the offense and upset it caused our guest and you, our viewers, we are profoundly sorry. She took a breath. The empty chair to her right seemed to suck all the energy from the room. Loose Women is a show about opinions, and we will always encourage debate. However, it is also a show about respect, and we are committed to ensuring that all of our guests are treated with the kindness and professionalism they deserve. We have reached out to Gary and his team to offer our sincere apologies. Coleen will be taking some time away from the show. She held her professional smile for a beat longer than was comfortable. Now, she said, her tone shifting gears with an audible crunch, let's start by talking about something that drives us all mad. Those pesky self-service checkouts. The show moved on. The panel discussed supermarkets. They watched a segment on soup. They laughed at a funny cat video, but the performance was hollow. Every joke felt forced, every smile was strained. The viewers at home saw it, the crew in the studio felt it, and the three women on the panel were living it. They were broadcasting live from a graveyard, haunted by the ghost of yesterday and the stark, silent presence of the empty fourth chair. 1 month later, the incandescent flash of camera bulbs turned the cool London night into a staccato daytime. On the red carpet for the premiere of The Lamplighter's Son, Gary Oldman moved with a practiced ease, a man entirely in his element. The film, buoyed by rave reviews and an unprecedented level of public awareness, was already being hailed as the masterwork of his later career. The irony was not lost on him. The ugliest 15 minutes of his professional life had inadvertently created the most successful promotional campaign imaginable. A young reporter from a major news outlet managed to get his attention. Mr. Oldman, the film is a triumph. But I have to ask, the incident on Loose Women has become a global talking point about decency in media. Looking back, do you have any final thoughts on it? Gary offered a small, thoughtful smile. The anger and sadness of that day had long since faded, replaced by a philosophical calm. I believe everything that needed to be said was said in that moment, he replied, his voice calm and even against the din. It was an unfortunate situation, and I sincerely hope it served as a reminder that discourse, whether on television or online, is always better when it begins from a place of mutual respect. Anything beyond that is just noise. He then gestured towards the cinema's grand entrance. Tonight, however, is about the work. It's about a wonderful story brought to life by hundreds of talented, hard-working people. I'd much rather we talk about them. With a polite nod, he moved on, leaving the reporter with a perfect, unusable soundbite. He had not only won the argument, he had transcended it. His part in the drama was over. The next morning, 2 statements were released simultaneously, landing in the inboxes of every journalist in the country. The first was from ITV's corporate communications department. It was brief, sterile, and utterly final. ITV and Coleen Nolan have mutually agreed to part ways. Her contract with Loose Women has been terminated, effective immediately. We thank her for her years of service to the program and wish her the best in her future endeavors. There will be no further comment. The second statement, released on Coleen's behalf by a crisis management firm, was longer and had a distinctly different tone. The defiance was gone, replaced by a carefully constructed humility. After a period of profound reflection, I've decided to step away from my role at Loose Women. The events of last month, and my role in them, have given me cause to reevaluate my position and my conduct. My line of questioning to Mr. Oldman was inappropriate, unkind, and unprofessional. I allowed a debate to become a personal attack, and in doing so, I let down my colleagues, my network, my viewers, and myself. To Mr. Oldman, I offer my deepest and most sincere apology for the disrespect I showed you. To the viewers I offended, I am truly sorry. I'm going to be taking a significant amount of time away from the public eye to listen, to learn, and to better understand the responsibilities that come with a public platform. I hope one day to earn back your trust. It was an unconditional surrender. For Coleen Nolan, the roar of the live studio audience had been replaced by a deafening silence. The consequences, once just a distant threat, were now her reality. Her fall from grace was complete. Back in Studio 2, the show went on, as it always did. The fourth chair was now permanently occupied by a sharp, witty comedian in her 30s who brought a fresh, less confrontational energy to the panel. The ratings had stabilized after an initial dip, and a new, slightly younger audience, intrigued by the controversy, had started to tune in. During a commercial break, Ruth, Janet, and Kay were chatting. The mood was lighter than it had been a month ago, the tension having finally dissipated. They had found their new rhythm. but a scar remained. The show was safer now. The debates were more measured, the opinions less incendiary. The producers in the gallery were quicker to shut down any line of questioning that veered too close to the personal. They had flown too close to the sun and had the scorch marks to prove it. The floor manager counted them back in. 5, 4, 3... Ruth Langsford turned to the camera, her familiar, comforting smile perfectly in place. Welcome back to Loose Women. Now, we've all had those moments where we've put our foot in it and said the wrong thing. So we're asking you, what's the most embarrassing thing you've ever said out loud? She winked at the audience. Janet chuckled. Kay rolled her eyes playfully. The show continued, a well-oiled machine of daytime chatter. But no one on the panel or in the gallery or in the executive offices would ever forget the day the machine broke down. They would never forget the anger, the cruelty, and the shocking dignified silence of a man walking away, leaving them to pick up the pieces of their own creation. The empty chair was gone, but its shadow remained.